Today is May 26, 2021. My name is Enchi. I'm an associate curator at the Houston Asian American Archive. Today, we're so honored to be interviewing Mrs. Metha Kave. Thank you so much, Mrs. Kave, for speaking with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
To start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, probably starting from when and where were you born?
Well, I was born in Mumbai, India, in the year 1957. And I lived there till I was 9 years old. And at that time, my father, who was a scientist, he worked for the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai, at that time called Bombay, um, did a sabbatical, excuse me, at Yale University. And so brought us, his family over, but would be my mother and my two siblings. I'm the eldest, and I have a younger sister and a brother. Thinking we would just be there for maybe 2 years. And he ended up staying, and he had some pretty interesting projects at Yale. He's a geochemist, and it was the time when they did the first landing on the moon. And he was one of the first scientists to study the moon rocks. So anyway, he was really into his research, and his institute kept calling him back, and he said, no, give me one more year, 6-month extension. And finally, he had to choose between staying in the US or going back. And just around that time, they had opened up immigration to Asians. As you know, there was restriction on Asian immigration all pretty much through the night, from probably late 1800s to it was like early 1960s. It was not till mid 1960, 65 that they passed the act that allowed people from Asia to get green cards. And my father was one of the first ones in that. And so we were one of the first Asian immigrants of that time. And so we ended up staying there in New Haven, Connecticut. And eventually my father found a research position working for a nuclear reactor in Puerto Rico. So we moved there for about a year and a half, and realized that that's really not the place where he wanted to raise a family. And so moved to California. He got a position with a environmental research company, and at that time they were getting a lot of Superfund contracts. So we moved to the Bay Area, and I started my freshman year in college at UC Santa Cruz, and stayed in California all the way through my graduation and until I got married to my husband, Shashank, and we moved. He brought me kicking and screaming to Houston, Texas, and I've been here now for 40 years. Both my children were born here. We lived in the Woodlands, one of the first residents of the Woodlands, and so that's where we've been at. We basically feel very much at home in Texas. And so we've been here, my kids have grown, I have grandchildren now. And actually we are planning to leave the Woodlands as soon as our home in the city is built. So we are scaling down from our huge home here and moving into the city, which I'm really looking forward to, not only because of all the cultural activities and proximity to museums, and especially the Museum of Fine Arts, where I've been a docent for 12, 15 years. And that will allow me to resume my activities there and be close to my grandchildren who live in the Heights. So kind of in a nutshell, that's my life so far. What would you like to know?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so fascinated that in your life, that just the brief introduction you gave, it's so transnational and so transgeography. Like,
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about the kind of experiences moving around and the comparison of
Uh-huh.
different cultures and probably the
Sure.
challenges.
Sure. Well, I think now when I reflect back on my childhood, I think the most traumatic um, part of my life, I think that caused me a lot of angst, and I didn't realize it at that time, but was the move from India to the United States when I was 9 years old. Because, at that time in India, we lived in a joint family, lived with my grandparents, my father's parents, had lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, and always just the idea of a nuclear family was strange. Okay, it was always extended family and always people dropping by, and there's festivals, and you're just you don't have a lot of things. It's not material based, it's just very family, society, your community. And moving to the US was very traumatic because all of a sudden you're yanked away from that. You don't really understand, you're still a kid. And I didn't realize how much I missed that, and how much of an impact that had on me. Loneliness, that's the first time I felt lonely. Yeah. And I think my parents felt lonely too, but they're adults, they were able to deal with it. So it was hard. It's very hard. And I really sympathize with other immigrants. And I, read a lot about immigrant experiences. And that is the one thing you feel that's a common thread is number one, the loneliness. Number two, feeling like you don't belong, because at that time in 1966, 67, there was no diversity. You would be the only other or the only non-white person in your class or what have you. And you just felt, culturally, racially, in terms of, just very alien. In fact, that's the name that I think they're trying to change now is um, being alien, your alien immigrant. So yeah, so that really has what was was really the most traumatic thing. I think the very and also being the eldest of my family, my brother and sister were like 4 and 5 years younger than me. I, like many older immigrant children, felt like I had to shepherd my family through a lot of things. My dad was in his early 40s. My parents were not the uh, the kind of immigrants that you find, say, in the last 20 years, who are say more sophisticated, more anglicized or westernized, know, with this interconnected world, what to believe, how things are. But they, of course, like most immigrants, they had strong accents. And many times I had to interpret for them, like I remember going to the grocery store with my mother and asking, she did speak English, although her English was not perfect, but she definitely spoke and read English. But I felt, I had to be sort of the interpreter. And so at the age of 9 and 10, that's a lot of responsibility for a child. And so I've always felt very responsible for my parents and my siblings. And it kind of, that move really took me out of my childhood. And I became a little adult at the age of 10. So 9 and 10. So it was, yeah, very significant. So that was one thing. Finally, after a couple of years in New Haven, we really enjoyed it there because it was a university setting. We met a lot more people of different backgrounds. We lived in university housing, and so that made a big difference. You were with other people who are of the same, not necessarily background, but experience. And we ended up really loving it there. And it was hard to move from there. And that was, I was in high school, and moving to Puerto Rico was not good. For any high schooler to move in the middle of high school is hard. And there in Puerto Rico, we lived in a city called Mayagüez, which is on the southwest coast of Puerto Rico. And we didn't speak Spanish. We really just didn't know what to expect. And it was very, again, kind of a cultural shock. And part of that was we went to school on an Air Force base. All the kids whose parents worked at this University of Puerto Rico research facility, and they all were bused to this Air Force base called Ramey Air Force Base, which was about a 45-minute bus ride up mountainous, road. And for the first time, I was exposed to other military kids. And that was very different mindset. They're used to moving around. And I just felt even more lonely there. Yeah. And so fortunately, we were only there for 1.5 years. And I think what I regret now is that I didn't embrace the culture there. Like, it was really an opportunity, but I think I was so stuck in being miserable and wanted to be miserable that I didn't really embrace it. And my dad soon enough got a position in the Bay Area, and we were very happy to move there. And of course, by then the Bay Area, this is in the early 70s, it was what, mid-70s, 1975, 1976 was getting pretty diverse. I mean, it was, and I was going to college, and yeah, so that really, my parents really, really loved it there. And so that really was my home until I got married about at the age of 25. So say about, I don't know, 8 years later. And yeah, so those were the two things. It's always difficult. It's being different. I know that is the recurring theme in all immigration stories. And even when I moved to Houston, my husband's in the oil business. He's Indian too. And, we were introduced with an arranged introduction, as a lot of Asian families are that way, Indians in particular. And he had come here to do his graduate work. He was at MIT, and he I was reluctant to meet him because I was very Americanized by that time. And my parents were like, no, but he's from a good family. He's from our community. He's so well educated, and he's got a great job in Houston, da, da, da. And I said, I kept putting it off. And finally I said, okay, I'll talk to him just to get my mother off my back. And he called me, and we just had long conversations on the phone. And he was in Houston, I was in San Francisco. And then he said, why don't we meet? And so he sent me an airplane ticket to come visit him in Houston. He was very much a gentleman, made accommodations for me and everything. And I was only going to stay maybe 2 or 3 days, and I ended up staying for 10 days. So, and the rest is history. So yeah, so that's kind of a brief summary of my experience.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Before I kind of delve into your kind of really interesting pivot into your love story with Mr. Carvey, can I also ask you about your earlier life, how you yourself coming here at 9 years old? Did you deal with accents as well? As I know you mentioned your parents deal with accents.
Yeah. Well, I went to an English school in Mumbai. It was it was actually a Scottish mission school, that one of the, one of those schools that the British established. And so I knew English very well. Yeah. Now I'm pretty sure I must have had a bit of an accent, but as a child, you just pick up very easily, the surrounding speech. And my younger brother and my sister didn't know any English. They were just like 3 and 4 years old. And, but they picked it up really fast. Just children do. Yeah, yeah. So I never felt that my speech was different or what have you, but I did feel, my mother wore a sari. She always wore a sari. Never did she ever wear Western clothes. And she wore, she had the dot, the kumkum, which is a mark of being a Hindu and a married woman. And so it was, people I know thought it was strange. They would stop and ask you, oh, what does that mean? Oh, or, give you second looks and glances. And that was, for me as a child, was embarrassing. I am, ashamed to admit that I really didn't want her to come to my school and for my peers to see my mother, because I was afraid they would make fun of her. And one time she did come and there were some boys that were giggling and laughing at her. And that really hurt me. And, but that's something that, children, I'm so happy that now my grandchildren, even my children and my grandchildren, didn't have to go through the kind of experience I did. Yeah. So things I think are progressing.
Yeah, that's definitely encouraging to know these differences across generations. And also, how do you see like people's reactions towards the way, as you mentioned, that back there in New Haven in Puerto Rico, it wasn't very diverse. Like, how do people treat? Did you feel like there was any kind of distinguished time or incident that you and your parents were treated differently because of the appearance or the accents? Um, and I'm also curious, since you yourself appear not like 100% Indian, if I can.
Mhm.
Yeah. So did you feel like there's any time that you were like back then that you were treated differently because of that?
No, at that time, no. People would, I've had, my mother is, both my parents are full Indian. Um, my mother is very, from the part of India we come from in the community, we're on the coast. So our community is known to be light skinned. And my mother was very, very fair and was considered a beauty, sort of, so to speak. And, but she wore sari. We come in all different colors, Indians. If you're from the South, you tend to be darker. If you're from the North, you have different features. The coastal people are different. So it's, we're not, I would have to explain that to people, because people would say to me, oh, well, you don't look at, well, at that time when I was a young girl, they didn't know what Indians looked like. I mean, this is more something that I get more recently, as, people, Americans, I've seen more of Indians and stuff. And, but at that time, no, not really. I think they just saw me, my name was so different, Medha. I would cringe every time the teacher would have to go down the roster on the first day of school and say my name. It's Medha, Medha, and it was always a woman. And actually I went to Catholic school for, a big part of that time. And the nuns would like, Medha, Karkar, and my maiden name is Karkar, Kharkar. And so, I was very embarrassed about that. I wish I didn't have a name like that. But no, I think I've had comments. I remember one time a really good friend of mine I had in junior high. She, all my friends were American. There weren't any Indians. And I didn't have a lot of friends, but the ones I did have, they were really good friends. I mean, it's usually all I needed was one friend, and that was enough. Anyway, this one girl, her name was Debbie, and she was a good friend, and we would, spend a lot of time together. And was she didn't have a mother. Her mother had died when she was quite young and was raised by her father, and she had brothers. And there was a lady who was sort of like her mentor. And she kept saying, oh, I've been telling this woman, whoever this one she's close to, all about you, my Indian friend, my Indian friend. And so she wants to meet you. And so at one point, I don't know, I met her. I don't really even remember, what she looked like or anything. And she was very pleasant. It was fine, not a big deal. I must have been 13, maybe. And then Debbie said to me the next day, and it's funny how this has stayed with me for so long. She said to me, oh, my, whatever, her friend said, she was so happy to meet you. And I said, oh, well, that's good. That's nice. She seems really nice. And she said to me, she goes, when you kept saying your Indian friend, I kept thinking of a small, dark, ugly looking thing. But your friend is so pretty. And Debbie thought she was paying me a compliment by saying that. And I was so upset by that. And after that, I decided I would always tell people that I'm Indian, that is not, I mean, I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to say, but it stayed with me. And, but I know from that point on, I was much more vocal about my ethnicity. So yeah, I think we all have these stories, but it stems from ignorance. It's ignorance, and I don't take it personally. I don't, that's just how they are. That's how it is when people are not exposed to people of other backgrounds and, other races and cultures. So yeah. The one thing I did get was what people would always ask me about the dot on my mother's forehead, and what surprised me was that some people actually thought it was a ruby that had been stuck there. And I said, well, how would a ruby stick on your forehead? And, it's not like they dug a little, a little hole in her skull and stuck a ruby in there. So there were some interesting comments. Yeah. But that was 1960s, early 70s. But and now I just see, although there's still of course there's still discrimination, there's still all of this, and especially lately with all the violence against Asians, and it was very disconcerting to me to see that we've made so much progress, and at the same time we're so behind, so yeah.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's really empowering to hear that you're being vocal about, like situations like that. And next, I'm really curious about, as you also mentioned, you're very Americanized, even though it's the cultural roots and your ethnicity you're very proud of. Can you share with us some of the experiences in these kind of intertwined identity within you, how they impacted your, probably later on, awareness about your identity and your support for South Asian art in arts and culture scenes?
Well, I've always been very proud of my heritage and the history, the cultural history of India. I think, I always felt now people have recognized that it has come to light. At that time, when I was when I was young, when I was a child, the idea of India was a starving country with very poor people who just, where it was all hand to mouth, and there wasn't much more beyond that. And I guess I just wanted to dispel that. I knew there was, people needed to know there's a lot more. And one thing I will say, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I'll go back to my childhood in India. And it's funny because I was so proud of being an Indian. At that time, I was, whatever, 6, 7, 8 years old. And you always sang the national anthem at school. And even in a movie theater, everybody sang the national anthem before the movie was shown. And one of, I remember the wars that India had. India had a war with China, and then there was a war with Pakistan while I was a young girl. And I remember the war. I mean, it was like everybody became very patriotic. It was just, I understand that mentality, now people, the nationalism. And I think I just embraced it. I knew I had it. To this day, I can recite the Indian national anthem. Um, and it's funny because my husband is Indian and he's grew up there. I mean, he came here for graduate school and I'm more Indian than him. And so he's always teasing me that, what, you are so, come on, you haven't been in, I've visited India often, of course, but it's like, why is it you're so bent on India? It's so dear to you. And it's like, yeah, it is. It's just my experience. I'm more like that than, I don't think either of my parents. They kind of like wanted to forget it. Okay, we've got this new life. My brother and sister were much younger, so they don't have that connection. But I have always had just a very deep connection to India. And I think I just see when I was growing up, there was so much love that I experienced. I had such fond memories. And um, it's like whenever I go there, I feel I belong, you know? It's just one of those things. Yeah. So I don't know how I got onto this. What was the question you had asked me?
Oh, we were just talking about the kind of
Oh,
different
why I
sides
am
of.
up. Yeah. So I've always supported, been wanting to do things for India. I've seen the disparities. I've seen, how really, people struggle. And my family in India is not rich. They were middle class, upper middle class. Seen them struggle. My father decided to remain in the US because to give a better life to his children. He felt there were more opportunities here. But yeah, it's been always it's very dear to me. India is very dear to me. And I've had the opportunity to study a lot about the art. And we had a wonderful exhibition a couple of years ago that my husband and I supported called Peacock in the Desert. It was the royal treasures from Jodhpur. And it was wonderful. And I just reveled in taking people around and showing them, what there was, and talking about the history and the culture, and showing them a side of India that, perhaps they were not aware of. So that's been that. And now what we do is we made a gift to the museum to support South Asian artists. And so to bring programming basically to Houston. And we had a recent one. Too bad with COVID, things have been really slow, but I'm hoping that, more, there will be, more programs to educate and to just enlighten people about India. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And thank you for all the contributions you've made for people to be experiencing arts, and especially South Asian art. Um, And before I jump on to the next question, by the way, I'm sorry for not pronouncing your name correctly earlier on. Can you
Oh,
tell?
no, don't worry. It's a hard sound to make because it's Medha, so it's Megha. And, but I'm used to everybody calling me Meda because that DH sound is extremely difficult for people who, for Americans or non-Indians to do, just as I'm sure with Chinese names, it's difficult, right?
Thank you for being understanding. Can you tell us a little bit of the meaning, or if there's any like metaphor behind your name?
My name, Meda, means in Sanskrit means intelligence. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So all our names are Sanskrit names, Indian names, and they all have pretty significant, deep meanings. Yeah.
Yep, thank you. And I'm also fascinated by earlier on when you were talking about how you met Mr. Covey. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
and can you tell us a little bit about like dating and the family culture around
Um,
dating
mhm.
back then?
Yeah, my parents were pretty liberal. They knew that their children were raised here and there was, they had to adapt. They were and they weren't, you know. Um, they paid lip service to it. Let's put it that way. They would always say, oh, no, it's fine. We don't really, whoever she marries, that's okay. Our children, as long as they're happy, but, down in the deep of their hearts, they wanted us to marry not just Indians, but Indians from their community. So that was important to both my parents. And I did date some, in college, and my parents met maybe one boyfriend that was kind of a serious boyfriend who was not Indian. But my my mother and this is what was a thing. I think my parents had a lot of visitors, Indians, I mean, coming to the Bay Area, I mean, San Francisco and all that. It was just, we always had a stream of visitors. And so one time there was this doctor and his wife who were our family doctors back in India. He and his wife came on a tour, and so they stopped and I was at home, and they wanted to set me up. They kept saying, oh, she's whatever. I was like maybe 19. Oh, she needs to meet so-and-so, so-and-so. And I just would kind of joke about it. And she said to me, she said, a nice Indian girl like you, only an Indian boy is deserving of you. So it was like put in such a way that they didn't want me to, like, throw myself away to somebody who wasn't deserving of me. So my mother used to use that to, that remark to say, now, no, you need to do, and so you're striding two different cultures. So yeah, my parents tried. Actually, my husband was really the first Indian guy I met, maybe second Indian guy I met. Yeah. And it just was, I mean, we didn't meet each other like face to face. He was in Houston, he called me. He was like really cool. I always had this impression of Indian men being like of my dad's generation, being very staid and, serious and not joking, or very kind of patriarchal. And he wasn't like that at all. He was just easy to talk to, joking, this, that, and, so it was, and I told him things that I said, I don't know if you want to really meet me. I'm too Americanized. I'm not gonna, follow this. If you think you're looking for somebody who's more traditional, I'm not like that. So I put all these things to just dissuade him from wanting to meet me. But he wanted to meet me, and we had like long conversations on the phone for a couple of weeks, and then he said, we need to meet. So that's how it was. And then when we did meet, we were attracted to each other. That's important. So, otherwise you can have a friendship, but if there's not that attraction or chemistry, then it's hard. But luckily, fortunately, it was a pleasant surprise to meet him. Yeah.
It's such an adorable story. Thank you for sharing. And next, I'm also curious about how dating has been in your upcoming generations, like your sons,
Oh,
daughters, and
yeah, my son and daughter, yes. Well, both my kids were born in the Woodlands. And in fact, it's funny that, my husband and I were just talking about that yesterday because we had gone out to eat. And we saw all these, the Woodlands High School, I think they just had their graduation yesterday, and they were all, all the graduates and their parents were around and everything. So we were like reminiscing about our kids. And with my daughter, she's the older one. She is what, 34 right now? 34, 35? Oh my God, I lost track. She really embraced high school, embraced school. She was very popular. She was in a big tennis player, this, that. I made it a point, because when we lived in the Woodlands, again, we were like the only Indian family then. There were not very many. It's quite much more diverse now, but at that point, when my kids were growing up, they were one of the only non-white kids. That's how it was. But knowing my experience, I wanted to make sure that they participated in everything, and if there was, very, very few encounters where I thought there was something amiss, like there was discrimination there or whatever, very, very few. But and once in a great while, the kids would come and tell me, so-and-so said something that I didn't sit well or was sort of mean. And I would say, you know what, that's their problem. It's not your problem. That's their problem. So I never wanted them, they knew they were proud of being Indian. We always went, my husband's parents lived in India, so we would go every other year to visit. And the parents, his mother would come visit. And of course, my parents were in California, so they're very knowledgeable and, very familiar with Indian culture. And so they didn't have the stigma that I thought I had, And I think it was also because I was so assimilated that I was able to befriend the parents of their friends, I was active in the school, so people, they saw me. I just thought it was important, for my kids' well-being, that I be very proactive and involved. And I think that helped a lot. As far as the dating and all of that goes, my daughter, yeah, I don't know if she didn't have a boyfriend in high school per se. She did go out a lot with friends, and we were talking, she said, she went to every prom and dance and social event there was. She was totally into the high school scene. My son, on the other hand, was not. He enjoyed it. He was a big tennis player, so he had something to anchor himself to, but I think he felt more as not as comfortable as she was. He had a lot of friends. It wasn't that. It was just, it's come to light later on in the years when I talked to them that, how did you feel when I asked them now, how was it going to school? How was it here? And I think with my son, what happened with just around when when kids are most vulnerable, they're like junior high, they don't have the maturity yet. They're still in that strange kind of adolescent stage. And that's when 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, Jay, my son, was in junior high or in 7th grade. And people thought he was Muslim, and there were comments made to him, and he was very, very upset. That was really one of the most, hard times for him, and he said, these kids, they think they're so holier than thou, and they think that because they're Christian, better than everybody else, and they're saying things, and I have to tell them that I'm not Muslim, but still I just think it's a bad thing to say. Why are they saying that? Um, saying, oh, you guys did this, you guys bombed us. And I said, Jay, they're just ignorant. They don't know. And it was a very small group of people. And it doesn't mean that that's representative of Muslims, So it really was kind of very traumatic for him to hear this. And after that, it just made a change. It made a difference. He became very he didn't want to hear anything about Christianity. He thought it was a farce, because he said all these people, these girls who are they're going to Bible study and doing this and doing that, they're such hypocrites, And so that made and so he was not in tune to being in Texas, being there. He wanted to just get out. And then I remember when he got a pickup truck, he did, when he turned 16, but he went and got a Darwin symbol to put on it. So he was kind of a rebel, not to say that he was not happy. He was happy, but he always sort of gravitated toward the kids that were the not traditional type, Yeah. So that was a difference between how different kids handle their situations. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure your son will also have fascinating oral history stories to tell.
Oh yeah, the kids always do. They only share so much with their parents, right? Yeah.
Well, if we can interview him, that would be fascinating as well.
Well, he lives in Seattle.
Yep.
Yeah.
I guess moving on, since we are also fascinated by your contribution in the art scene, and this is also part of the People of Art special collection that we're capturing narratives for. Can you tell us a little bit about what's the first encounter for you in the arts? Like what draw you to art particularly?
Well, I've always loved art. I always used to doodle and draw and, do some little bit of painting, drawing, this, that. I'm kind of like a jack of all trades. Do a lot of crafty things, sewing, this, you name it. And, I just always admired how paintings, just what it took to produce something. And a lot of times I never had any formal art training, like no art history or whatever, but I just always really appreciated just, what people could create. And one thing I should mention is during my married life, our family lived in Singapore for a couple of years. My husband was working on a project there. And I just loved, all the Chinese scroll paintings, and I would wander in and out of galleries, and so I started purchasing art that I just like. So I have a silk screen, a Chinese silk screen. I have a couple of paintings from there. I have something that was one of those long scrolls that was given to me by one of my husband's colleagues. I just, I have a little bit of sculpture. I have different things, but I'm not a collector. I don't go out and say, okay, this is the artist I want, this is that. I just don't. If something spoke to me, I have it. So I have, just art from whenever I travel. I always would, buy something that spoke to me from my travel. So it's not necessarily, valuable per se. I have things, just drawings in my powder room or one area, which are street art, like drawings from when I was in Bali, that an artist was selling on the sidewalk, to a painting that I got at a very nice gallery, so it's just, if it speaks to me, I had it. And so I've just always appreciated the talent and the perseverance that it took to create this. And when you've tried yourself to create something and you see how difficult it is to cut, then you appreciate other artists. So that was what it was. And then I like to go visit exhibits and things like that. And once my children were gone, a friend of mine I knew she was a docent at the Museum of Fine Arts. And I said, I have time now. I think I'd like to, see what this is about. So I went through the training and I just really enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning about different exhibits coming through, the art the museum had. I loved imparting, taking kids around. I was, basically, I was in the doing children's tours mostly. But I remember when the exhibit from the National Gallery of Taiwan came, I trained to do those tours and I loved it. I just learned so much about China, and I just enjoy it. I do what I enjoy. So, and right now I'm a little sad because it's been on a year and a half that the museum has not done any tours. We're not there as a docent corps yet, but I'm looking forward to hopefully in the next year, it'll open up. And I think art is such a wonderful teaching medium, to make people aware of different cultures, different eras, history. I think it's just a wonderful medium to impart information, knowledge, and gain that, to know that, we're all the same. We're all very interconnected. And this is a way to appreciate other people different from you, and just humanity. So that's basically what I feel.
Wow, that's super inspiring. And I totally agree that only in arts or any kind of creatively kind of activity in humanity that you see culture and this common
Mhm.
ancestor or common traits in humanity. That is so.
Yeah.
And can you share with us some of the experiences in arts? Either it's a tour that you've done for of the visitors, or an art studio visit, or an art exhibition that kind of took you away that you wanted to tell us about.
Well, let me go back to the National Gallery of from China, the exhibit that was there then. And one of the things that was really struck me was how sophisticated the artists from China from back in, you're talking what, in BC, I mean, way before that, like 10,000 years ago, what they were coming up with, the ceramics, the firing techniques. We had some beautiful pieces, works of art that were, it was, pottery, or, and wonderful colors, just beautifully made. And what I wanted to show people is that, okay, I had high school students, and I said, to show you how important, if you look at something and you see, oh, well, that's beautiful, okay, that's nice, but to get a connection or to really understand how advanced this culture was, you have to see what other cultures were doing at the same time, okay? So I had pictures of pottery that was being made in Europe, at that time, that has been found, and it was very rough. They didn't have the techniques, they didn't have the degree of the skill. And I said, see, this is what they were making at that time, and this is what the Chinese artists, the ceramicists, were making. This is at the same time. What do you think? So it's like a way to start a discussion, right? So it was like, wow, how did they know how to do this? What materials did they have? Why didn't whatever, the Dutch or the English, why weren't they able to do it? Well, and so then that leads into a discussion of, well, they had the certain kind of the kaolin clay and whatnot, and it was, they were just very highly skilled because they put a lot into it, and it was perfected. And then later on, you can talk about how this skill was transferred to the Europeans, how they got that, and learned how to do that, and then they became masters in ceramics then, so it's that sticks out to me as number one, to show, to start a discussion, and to get people to think about time frames and different, cultural attributes, or what was important, again, with the Chinese paintings, where you'd have the well, the style was so different. It was like there were scholars, and I would talk about, how that was part of their scholarly work, and how important it was to be recognized as a gentleman, a learned person with all these skills, that. So that's one thing. On other exhibits, I don't know, there's so many things that come out. It's hard to, just pick one thing. But I think that when I was doing the Indian exhibition, the Peacock in the Desert, I could see we were not taking children through there. That was a ticketed exhibition, so it was mostly adults. And I remember taking, people through, and they would see, I would tell them about, these, they had, the Maharaja, had several wives. I mean, it was, they had like 10, 12 wives. It was, part of their tradition, but the wives had a lot of autonomy. They came with wealth. They were able to keep their wealth. They were able to, run a business. So that was very surprising to a lot of the visitors. They think that when you have wives, it's like they're in a harem and they're like sequestered and that's it, and they have no freedom, nothing. But you realize to let they learned that no, this was not the case with this. These were very learned women, that was important in that culture. And they did this, they knew how to hunt. There were lots of paintings of, the wives on horseback with, going tiger hunting. And so it's just neat to see when something clicks, and you tell them, and people are surprised and they start thinking a different way, right? So this is like in the, I don't know, in like the 14th century, 13th, 14th century, these works of art that were there, and you just say, see, this is what it was. This was the culture then. This was the high culture, the Maharaja culture. So they were not harems, So yeah, so there's many examples like that. And actually it's a learning experience for me, because as the guide, as the docent, I have to do a lot of research and find out about this and go to all the information, the training sessions, and it's wonderful. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And next, I'm also curious about your first piece of collection. I know you talked about how you travel and collect pieces, and those pieces are special for you in the moments in that space where you were in that moment of collection. Can you tell us a little bit about your first piece and how it might have moved you in starting it?
Okay, well, actually my first piece of real art that I spent, at that time, my husband and we were very young, and I think we had our kids. Yeah, they were babies. And there was this ceramics, or like a studio just outside the Woodlands, a little kind of a little house. And I had gone in there once just out of curiosity to see what that was. And it was a woman, she was an ex-nun, and she was making bronzes. And So I brought my husband there and I said, I want this sculpture. And it was a nude, a bronze piece. It's a couple of feet big. And I just loved it. You know, it has that green sort of verdigris color to it. And it was more than he would have ever thought to spend. Because I mean, look, he's an engineer, you know, he's not an artistic person, or he's come to appreciate art because he knows I love it so much. And I convinced him, I said, no, I really just want this piece, you know. So he relented and I have that. So that really is the oldest piece of art that I would say that I have, is a sculpture. And then let me see, then it was on my travels, let me see, we had been to Bali. I just loved, you know, we were up in the hills, and I went to that's a big artist place, and I saw this painting, and I just fell in love with it. It was like a procession going down a dirt road. And I liked it because, you know, the Balinese culture is Hindu, and I just, that fascinated me. So I got a painting from that. On one of my travels, I had accompanied my husband to Ghana. And while he was working, I was, you know, shopping around, and I went to a wonderful gallery, and there were so many beautiful paintings. And I think it's one of my most prized paintings. It's a group of ladies walking away with the big, you know, with clay pots on their head, and it has a kind of an abstract feel to it. I've gotten that. I have from Singapore, I have this one painting. It's actually a silk on silk, and it's a pagoda, you know, with the cranes, very typical, you know, Chinese art. I have silk paintings from Japan, because my husband went to Japan a lot. I would go with him. You know, just Mexico, you know, just different places I've been to that if I came across something, I'd say, okay, I want that. But also I've gone to art fairs here, and like, you know, the Houston, the Bayou City Art Fair or whatever. And if something, I just loved something, the colors or the way it was done, I've gotten that. One of my prized paintings I got in Singapore, and what it is, it's a tea plantation done by an artist from Myanmar that I saw at a gallery. And he used a syringe to create the texture. And it's just something I'd never seen before. It's a quite large scale. So it's just, you know, yeah, there's no rhyme or reason or collection to my, or you know, like a theme to my collecting or anything like that. So that's why I don't say I'm not a collector. I just like art, and if it speaks to me, I'll, you know, it's for me to enjoy. Yeah.
So do you actively source for art, or do you?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Great, thank you so much for
No.
sharing.
Yeah.
And I also see this drawing behind you.
Oh, this one, that's one thing I made. I've taken classes at Glisel here. And that was, yeah, I have that drawing there. Then I have, let me see, I just did this yesterday. I've been doing some watercolor. So
Beautiful.
dabbling in different things, you know, now that I have time. And yeah. So no, I love to create. And yeah, it's just like my happy place to be. So I'm up here in my studio, actually.
Wow, that's so fascinating to hear your vibrant lifestyle and interest and passion just for culture and life in general. And we were talking also about how art is fluid and its identity and its representation. And yourself is also someone who is fluid in terms of the places you've been. You've been truly transnational, like born in India, went to Singapore, and ended up here and being in different places. How maybe the fluidity in terms of art and your own identity and you've been kind of working towards a number of initiatives, including South Asian art collection and different events to kind of educate and publicize South Asian art. Can you talk about how you made the decision and towards the different types of art you support and how it impacted your journey with art?
Well, I guess the reason, I mean, I would support all kinds of art. The thing that has drawn me towards South Asia is that I think it's underrepresented, you know. There's enough people who support Latin America. There are a lot of Latin Americans, there's Middle Eastern, there's, you know, Asian, Chinese, Japanese, there's all that. But I feel like South Asian art has not been represented as to what it could be. And Houston has a large South Asian population. And it would be good if, you know, more people were involved in that. So that's why, you know, I felt like this is where I could make an impact, you know, was there. But I know, well, we have Asia Society and wonderful, wonderful exhibits there by, you know, contemporary artists. And that's one thing that I hope that the MFAH will to bring some traveling exhibits from you know, South Asian artists, because there is so much. I've seen works in other countries. I've seen exhibits. One of the exhibits I saw that made a huge impact on me was one time I was in Tokyo with my husband. He was on business. And I went to this exhibition it's called Let's Go India. Okay, that was the translation, but it's called Chalo India. Chalo means let's go. And it was contemporary artists. And it was just amazing, amazing, you know, the kind of statements. Okay, so no, I was just saying that I was, you know, I'm supporting South Asian art because it's underrepresented, I feel. Yeah. And I was saying that Asia Society is wonderful. It brings a lot of contemporary artists, you know, Asian artists, and that's great. I do feel that, you know, Asia Society, yes, it has its place, but I think the MFAH has a larger platform, if I may say, a larger platform, and it just has more visibility, you know, and is at a different tier. And that's where I would like that to be a platform for contemporary artists from Asia. Yeah. So, and, you know, South Asian artists, I know you have like Ai Weiwei, this, that, they've come, but I feel like we have like Subodh Gupta, we've got the Bean, who is that guy? Now, you know, as I'm getting older,
Anish Kapoor.
Anish Kapoor. We have the big, you know, installation in the outdoors, which is wonderful. So no, I just think that, you know, and everybody does their part, you know. I know that those who are passionate about Islamic art, we have a beautiful Islamic art gallery there at the museum. We have, I mean, wonderful, wonderful Chinese gallery. We have the South Asian gallery. So it's just, you know, we're just a very interconnected world, and all our cultures are also that way, and, you know, and more so. So it's, I just feel like I'm just doing the part that I can do.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you for the support in arts and culture. And next, I'm also curious about how you and your husband, as a philanthropist couple, has also been working on so much different initiatives for charitable reasons, such as the MITD lab that you're trying to help people who are underprivileged for education, and the Pratham initiative.
Yeah.
The JLF, the Jaipur Lights Festival. Can you talk a little bit about all these different philanthropy activities?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. You know, we feel like so many people that life has been good to us and that we have to give back. And I think that's really, really important. And if more people did that, I think we'd be in a better world. And feel very extremely fortunate that we're in a position that we can give. You know, it's a privilege for us to be able to contribute. So, you know, as far as MIT goes, my husband went to MIT and he credits his education there as giving him, you know, the opportunities that he's been able to realize. And one of the things, you know, we are very much interested in development in the third world. And one of the initiatives that we supported was a lab, a development lab for students to create projects that they can transfer to underprivileged communities in the developing world that can be used to better their lives, you know, whether it's water purification or you know, whatever health issues, just sewage systems or whatever. And that's what we were very impressed with what the program that MIT has, that the students take a course and on how to do this, come up with ideas, and they actually go out in the field and implement those ideas. So and because my husband travels so much because of the business, being that he was in the oil business, there have been projects in Africa, there have been projects in Brazil that, you know, we have helped in some form or another, you know, either say donating airline tickets to students or, you know, just not on a huge scale, but whatever we could. And so that's been one of our interests is to help with development, and so that the people in that community can actually use resources that are available to them to improve their lives, number one. No, I was saying that, you know, we're always interested in development, people helping themselves, and education falls into that because education is the key to improving your life. You know, that's been pretty universal and has been our direct experience. So where we can, so Pratham is a way to, we, you know, so have supported for many, many years. So we just do our part to help there. And we've also started a scholarship, an endowment at MIT for students. So, you know, to help, yeah, deserving students who can't afford to go to MIT, and they can. So we're very, very happy about that. Yeah. So that's where we are. That's where we're at. Yeah.
Wow, amazing work. Thank you so much. And I'm sure a lot of other people will be thankful for you too. And I guess as we're approaching the end of the interview, would you like to leave a time capsule for, say, a message for your future generations, for example, your grandchildren and your grandchildren's grandchildren?
Well, I guess what I would say is seize the day, carpe diem, but give back, you know, give back. Because that is nothing more satisfactory than that. And nothing more heartening than to be able to do your part. Yeah. So.
Absolutely, that's heartwarming message for your future generations.
Yeah.
And yeah, is there anything else you would like to add to the interview? If there's any gaps I didn't cover?
Well, no, the only thing I would say is in just as far as the philanthropy goes, my husband, I'm sure, you know, he's been interviewed. And so he is on, his big passion right now is Habitat for Humanity. And so we, you know, want to do something for our Houston community here. So that's something I neglected to say. But other than that, thank you very much. Thank you, Anne, and to Ann Chow for undertaking this project and so that we can make our voices known. And I consider it, I'm very honored that you reached out to me to tell my story.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank
your
you.
stories too. And thank you for all the work you do.